I believe it's a very important topic to be covering, and we're actually going to try and lump a lot of different topics together into one, hopefully almost an hour. We're going to talk about genetically modified foods, we're going to talk about food allergies and sensitivities, and we're going to kind of tie all that in with what is gluten and is it good, is it bad, is it indifferent, what's going on with gluten these days, because everybody seems to hate it. So, OMG, what's the deal with GMOs? And really what we want to see is the connection between all these different subjects and how is it affecting your quality of life, because that's really what everything comes down to here. Is you're going to have a good quality of life, or you're going to have a poor quality of life, and we want to try and ensure good quality of life. Now, you all come to this office, or you have some sort of association with this office, so I'm guessing you have some sort of an association with wanting to live healthy and more natural perspectives on keeping yourself healthy. And because of that, I know we're all kind of, I don't want to say on the same team, but we have a lot of similar ideas when it comes to being healthy. But there are people out there that think that things like GMOs and gluten and food sensitivities are they're okay or they don't exist, and so we want to try and talk about some of those things and give some truth behind those. We have to consider other people's, just in case anybody here is like, well, I'm in favor of GMOs. We're not necessarily going to beat each other up about those things. Okay, we're going to be very civil here tonight, and I know you guys are going to be that way. So that's the second part. Let's be respectful of each other. And the last thing is I am not a trained geneticist or genetic engineer. I'm not a farmer. But as a doctor, it is important to look at these subjects and say, how are these affecting people's health? And that's why we're having this workshop here tonight. So, yeah, I don't claim to be an expert. If you see some of these slides and you're going to start asking me about transgene location and the different methods of, I can give you my limited knowledge on that and my research, but I will try and answer as many questions as I can, as well as I can, okay? So our overview here, what the heck is a GMO? That's going to be the first section we're going to talk about. Second section, is gluten really that bad? And then the last section is, are food sensitivities really for real? So, yeah, that's one I get a lot, food allergy and food sensitivity, so we're going to differentiate those things. Before we really get into this, though, just to kind of have a basic overview of, just to kind of make sure you have some of the, I shouldn't say overview, you have some of the ground blocks that we can build on here. We have to answer the question, what is food? If you came to my digestive health workshop around this time last year, this looks really familiar because you would have seen it then. When we look at food, food is energy. It is building blocks. That's really the main reasons why we eat food. We don't eat food just to feel good. We eat food because it gives us energy and because it allows us to rebuild our bodies. And as you can see here, every cell's function requires that we have food. So we have to ask the question, what is real food? And what are food-like products? And those are the things that we read on an ingredients label and we're like, well, I don't even know what this is. It looks like a really long chemical name. Or yellow sunshine dye number 40. These things aren't necessarily foods. And one of the things that we'll get into here are genetically modified organisms. Are they still food? We'll have to analyze that. So one of the authorities on this subject, I would say, especially coming from a natural perspective, is Dr. Arden Anderson, who used to practice over at Crossroads and is no longer there, but he wrote a book called Food Plague that I got a lot of really good information from. It's something I'm going to be looking at adding to our library here, so that way we can have it available to you to read, but a lot of really good information and some good research behind it. The other guy over here, Dr. Younger, he is a very intelligent cardiologist. He's written a couple books too that I'll maybe reference along the way, but I really like this this quote from, it's called Hungry for Change. It's a film that's out there, a documentary, and he says, the problem is we are not eating food anymore, we are eating food-like products. So things that look like food, but aren't necessarily the foods that we would have eaten, say, 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, even 50 years ago, 20 years ago even, as we saw in some of the intro videos we were watching here. A lot of these things have changed in the last 25, 30 years. The other thing we have to establish is how is food digested? We have to look at the digestive system, and the digestive system is made up of millions and, I should say, billions of cells. There's just an absolutely crazy amount of cells in here, but even what's more crazy than that, and we're not going to get into tonight, is that there's even more bacteria that live in our digestive system, at least there should be. Good bacteria, sometimes bad bacteria. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. This is, imagine, this is food coming through this part of your digestive system right here. We have our cells, we have all these little fingers here that kind of stick up, and these are called villi. And on each of these little fingers that stick up, there's little structures called microvilli, even smaller structures exactly like this that are around here. So if you took the entire surface area of your digestive system and like spread it all out because of all these little, these small fingers, and then if you had to unravel everything, I believe that you cover about the size of a football field. So there's a lot of area for absorption of food from these cells here. But we have nice tight junctions in between these cells. There's no holes. This is a barrier, just like our skin is a barrier, just like our respiratory system is a barrier. Things aren't supposed to get across those barriers into our circulatory system. This is our circulatory system. Right down here you can see little red blood cells going down through here. The things that should happen, though, is we should be able to absorb nutrients, and we should be able to absorb amino acids from protein. We should be able to absorb lipids from fats, and we should be able to absorb simple carbohydrates. But what happens is sometimes our digestive system isn't doing so well, and we get some inflammation, which we'll talk about later. I'll run through all this in a lot more detail. And we start to see this type of a thing, where things are leaking through the digestive layer and into our circulation that shouldn't be there. When our body gets this type of a situation occurring, it causes an immune response. And the immune response is what is behind most of what we're going to talk about here tonight. That's why we had to address it here ahead of time, just to have that groundwork. So when I talk about an immune system, this is how it's all connected. Like the one video Dr. Anderson said, 70, and I've even heard 80% of our immune system is contained within our digestive tract. That's how we're exposed to a great amount of stuff. The food we eat, the bacteria, the viruses. You guys know this inherently from how we get sick. So with that, we'll jump into what the heck is a GMO. We have to first understand what are genes, though. As you can see, genes are, and I know this is getting kind of small here, there's a lot of information, but genes are short portions of what we call nucleic acids that code for proteins. Nucleic acids are just basic chemical building blocks, but it's through these building blocks that we transfer genetic information from one cell to another. It's how we make proteins, and that's exactly what we see down here. Nucleic acids make proteins, which give us cell structure and energy production, but it's also replicated and passed from generation to generation, whether that be in humans or animals or plants or bacteria or virus. All of these things have genetic material that they can pass and they can share within their species. And sometimes, as you know, when we get a virus within us, it will share some of its nastiness with us as well, or a bacteria. There are roughly 20 to 25,000 genes in humans, each coding for specific proteins. That just tells you how complex and how amazingly our bodies are created, that there are all these different codes within our genetic structure that can be expressed at the right time, at the right place, to form human beings and cause human beings to function the way they're supposed to. The amazing thing about this is only about 1% of the genetic code is actually materials for proteins and traits. There's lots of other stuff in between all these genetic sequences. And we're like, well, what is this all for? And they thought it was all just kind of like nonsense, and we don't really understand why it's there when they did the genetic sequencing project. But what they're thinking is this other 99% of the genetic structure is actually what gives us control over whether the genes are going to be expressed or if they're not going to be expressed. Does your genetic makeup say that you're going to have Parkinson's? Well, this other 99% might not allow that to happen if they don't get turned on. That's kind of what we're seeing, and this leads us into what we call genetics versus epigenetics. Genetics says you have this genetic code, you're going to have this susceptibility to disease, or your eyes are going to be this color, your hair is going to be like this. And again, we get a lot of that from our parents, so we have a lot of similarities from one generation to the next, but there are minor changes along the way, because epigenetics plays a role as well. And epigenetics says the environment that's around us, that's within us, is going to affect how our genes are expressed. Are they going to cause these genes to turn off or to turn on? And there's all kinds of chemical signals that can do that. And we'll address a few of those as we go through tonight. genes are transferred via sexual reproduction. That is the created way that they were meant to be transferred. There are some other little things that happen in nature where viruses and bacteria, a lot of times they'll share genetic information. If they have something that makes them more viable, they will sometimes share those types of things, and they will almost kind of like stealing from each other to make themselves better. But for the most part, it is all shared through sexual reproductive types of means, even in the plant and obviously in the animal kingdom as well. This here, and again, I'm not going to go through a genetics lesson with you, but this just kind of gives you an idea. We have DNA, we have this process called transcription where RNA comes in and it reads the sequence, it then leaves the part of the cell where the DNA is held, and it goes out to a place almost like a manufacturing plant. It's like taking the plans from the foreman's office out to the plant, giving it to the workers, and then the workers read the plans, and then they start assembling, in this case, amino acids. Amazing that this happens in each and every one of our cells constantly. So that's really the big picture of what happens here. What happens when we get amino acids, when we get proteins, as you can see from this little slide over here, it says that we then develop traits. Like I said, it might be your eye color. It might be the tone and texture of your skin. There's lots of different things that are expressed through our genetic code, and it makes us who we are. So, now that we kind of have a little bit better understanding what genes are, what is a GMO? Well, as we saw from the video, only one person could figure out GMO stands for genetically modified organism. So, it is an organism that has an artificially modified genetic structure. We say artificially because it is somebody outside of the situation manipulating it. As opposed to in nature, sometimes, as I said, genetic structure will be modified from one generation to another. We call them mutations. But this is being done artificially. The World Health Organization's, their definition is an organism in which genetic material, DNA, has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally. Naturally, that's kind of a big red flag right there in my mind. The European Parliament and Council, when they were drafting their what is a GMO statement, said the genetic material has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally by mating and/or natural recombination. So they just took the definition a little bit further. For the history of genetically modified organisms, we were really figuring out some of these genetic things in the 70s. And so in the 80s, there was the first genetically modified organism patented. It was actually a bacteria. And this bacteria was created to be able to help clean up oil spills. And you may have heard about that when it happened. The next thing that kind of came along, or I shouldn't say the next thing, but really the first agricultural thing that came along was the flavor saver tomato, which was bred with certain genes so that it would stay fresh longer out on the vine. It wouldn't rot so quickly. So 1994 was when that came out. 96 were the first glyphosate-resistant crops, and that's really what Roundup is. If you all have heard of Roundup, essentially an herbicide that goes in and kills weeds. By 1999, agriculture was readily bringing these things into existence, trying to get more and more GM crops made. And if you drive around here, especially because we're in northern Indiana or southern Michigan, there's a lot of genetically modified crops being grown around here. You see the as-grown signs. You see a lot of hybridized things. You see the DeKalb corn. Those types of things are hybridized. If you go up to Constantine and you drive past the big Monsanto building on the left and then Pioneer buildings on the right, Constantine is the GMO seed corn, or not seed corn, it is the seed corn capital of the world. So far, corn is not GM, or sorry, corn is GM,
Yes.
wheat is not GM, so we have that going for us still. But yeah, so there's lots of genetic stuff going around here that, yeah, literally right under our noses. So the current situation, and this kind of gets into what I was just alluding to here, soy in the United States is 94% genetically modified, cotton is 90%, canola 90%, sugar beets, which is where we get a lot of our sugar, our refined sugar is made from, corn 88%, Hawaiian papaya more than 50%. We saw that video in the intro again, kind of talking about how that all came to be. And then zucchini and yellow squash are also included in this as well. Most other crops, even though they aren't GMO, are hybridized. And that's where we're going to get into talking a little bit about the wheat and how they've selected for certain traits and crossbred. And that's what we see even with the corn, the detasseling and trying to get certain traits genetically passed from one generation to the next and others to not be. So that's more hybridization. The US has no labeling laws when it comes to genetic modification. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I think that's kind of interesting. European Union does require labeling for human consumption. This is an example of something from Ireland and Great Britain, that it just says water, vegetable oils contains genetically modified soybean oil. So they have to put it on the label if it is genetically modified. But if it's animal feed, they don't have to say. That's kind of where the situation is right now in European Union countries. But at least they're doing something about it. How are GMOs created? And we kind of saw, again, in that video to kind of give you a little bit of introduction, but there's a few different ways that they can do this. It's an infective process, is one way they can do it, where they actually take and they infect a seed with a bacterial or viral gene. And then because the seed or the plant would normally have its immune system kicking, because they have immune systems, and defeat this, they'll oftentimes give it something to suppress its immune system, almost like an antibiotic. Or sorry, not antibiotic, but they'll something to downregulate their immune system. The other thing that they can do, or another thing they can do, is they can, and this sounds like science fiction because it kind of is, but they can coat the DNA in tiny particles of metal, and then as we saw that, it's like the particulate accelerator gun or whatever, and this is essentially what it is this gun that shoots these particles of DNA covered in metal pellets into the genetic structure, and you're just hoping it somehow arrives into the nucleus where it's supposed to. A lot of it's very haphazard. You can inject DNA into a fertilized egg with a fine needle, and that way you can start to have that egg produce traits that will then go on into the next generations. You can take an electrical current and interrupt sperm cell membrane, inject the DNA that you want to in there, and then you can use that sperm to then fertilize an egg. And by that method, you can also introduce new genetic code into an organism. And some of this is with relationship to plants, some of it is relationship to animals. They've done some weird things with animals.
Mm-hmm. Like Monsanto wanting to patent a pig.
Patent a pig that has like cowhide on it.
Who knows what?
Yeah.
Weird.
An interesting one with, there's a spider that makes a very amazingly strong fiber for its webs, and they want to put this gene into goats, so that way they can just milk the goats and get the fiber out, and you can make something that's stronger than Kevlar for bulletproof vests.
What?
Yeah, that's a little interesting. And this is the stuff, and I encourage you guys, do some research, look into this. There's a lot of this out there on the internet. A lot of medications are being produced through this type of a method where you put the gene in, and all of a sudden you have an animal that can produce insulin, and you can extract the insulin from it. So again, there's lots of crazy, amazing, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, you might think it's awesome and fantastic. You might think that it's really scary and dangerous. So this gives a little illustration, kind of as I was talking about on the previous page. We take the section of DNA that we want, we put it into a vector or something that we can then implant into the cell. Copy the vector into the bacteria, and then you coat it with the metal. You load it into the gun, you shoot it into the petri dish with all of the seeds on it, and it enters the cell. The genes are incorporated theoretically into the plant's or the seed's genome. You then put them on a selective antibiotic media because, again, you want to see if it's resistant or not to antibiotics. And then you see which ones grow. And the ones that have incorporated the antibiotic resistance will grow, and then all of a sudden you have this insect-resistant tomato plant. So this is something I got off of the University of Utah on their genetics webpage. And that'll be one of the resources at the end. I got a lot of good information from them. Another way, again, just using an infective mechanism where you infect a cell with this, and then again it will pass it on to further generations, and again you're looking for, is this gene going to express itself in the plant, and then you just continue to breed for it. So a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. You know, we heard of people like Gregor Mendel, kind of the father of genetics, and he was cross-pollinating plants to see if he could get different traits from one plant to another. And these are things that happen in nature all the time that we don't necessarily manipulate or put our hands into, but they happen over long, long periods of time. And this is just kind of talking about, again, like I said, this is all sexual reproduction. We have male and female aspects of the plant that come together that end up giving us seeds when all is said and done. And from those seeds, and again, this is genetic material being transferred, is going to look like the parent. But again, you can affect, if you take the female or the male part and extract it and then mix opposing breeds essentially within the plant community, you can get something that will be different from its parents. And again, sometimes that is advantageous, sometimes that's a good thing, because over the years they've been able to develop some, we say a good thing, they've been able to develop things that are more resistant, that maybe can stand drought or can withstand colder weather. But some of the things that they're doing now, we're seeing that they can actually like implant genes that things start to produce their own antibiotics, like plants. So it just seems a little out there. How are GMOs different than hybrids? And the first thing we have to establish is what is heirloom, and that's kind of the traditional, like this is what's been going on for generation after generation after generation. It hasn't been touched. Its genetic code has stayed essentially the same, and this is pollinated by natural forces: wind blowing pollen around, bees, birds, those things carrying pollen from one area to another. It's a natural process that God designed in order for there to be differentiation in nature. Men step in and they say, well, cool, if wind and bees and birds can do this, we can too. And again, that's more hybridization to say, okay, this specific trait, we want to try and mix these two traits together so that way we get a more vibrant plant. And that way we can continue that on from generation to generation once the code is changed. A GMO is inserting that genetic material from different organisms into a different organism, and sometimes across species barriers. So what are some of the just kind of apparent problems? As we're just looking at this whole process, what kind of problems do we see? Well, the first is that there's potential for abnormal genetic implantation, meaning that we don't always know where those genes are going when they're getting injected or bombarded into the cells that they're targeting. So there's a potential that it's not going to go to the right location, or it's going to activate a promoter area that it wasn't planned on. It could potentially create new toxins. It could make the food more allergenic. It could produce carcinogens, and it may cause nutritional deficiencies to develop in the plant. The second concern, and if you ask a farmer who is keeping more towards traditional methods, they say genetic modified organisms are contaminating my crop because the GM pollen is out there floating around. If it gets into something that's purebred, if you take it back to the plants that haven't been genetically altered, the heirloom type plants, it's going to then change its genetic structure for generations to come, and it's essentially contaminating or polluting that farmer's their crop and their seed line. Another problem, and this is one of the things that is implanted into a lot of corn, is that they have this Bt toxin, and it comes from a naturally occurring soil bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis. Completely natural thing that is inherent in soil, but what they've done, and they've taken it and put it into the genetic structure of the corn, so that way when something eats the corn, it gets infected with this Bt toxin, and Bt toxin is mechanism of action is it goes through it and it tears pores or holes in the insect's intestinal tract essentially, and it dies. So it could be an apparent problem for us today. Increased herbicide and insecticide can be used now because it's now resistant. So like, well, we don't have to be careful because Bt toxin is actually used in organic farming. What they do is they're very careful with it. They don't necessarily just go and spray it all over the place. Whereas now they can be a little more liberal and just kind of put the herbicides and the insecticides out as needed because they know the plants that they truly desire are going to be resistant. Roundup Ready, these can stand glyphosate treatment, and that's not necessarily bad in and of itself, but when you start to put a bunch of glyphosate, this chemical down, it can be very, very not advantageous for us and for the rest of the soil population, because what it does, how glyphosate works,
Turn them down.
is that it robs nutrients essentially from the surrounding soil. It takes trace minerals out. It's a chelator, and it binds it up so that nothing else can use it. Funny little card I found here on the internet, and here we have a bunch of food made from crops that cause insect stomachs to explode, but it's safe for you to eat. So, and again, we have to question, okay, is it really safe for us to eat? I'm not going to get into a bunch of like government conspiracy. There's some documentaries out there that address that pretty heavily, but there is this what they call a revolving door between biotech industry and government. People that are heads of biotech industries have a lot of time been in the government, lobbyists, those types of things. So again, I'm not going to dive into that a lot, but they have the government's ear. Research is conducted by production companies, and a lot of the stuff that is done by third parties who, and this is the thing, like I said, this is highly polarized. Because the people that want to say that GMOs are safe are of course going to do studies that find, oh yes, our GMOs are safe. The people that don't want to see GMOs be safe are going to do studies, and the studies are going to have the results of no, they're not. And so I trust people much more wise than myself to read these studies and write books and give us information as to why, yes they are or no they are not. Like I said, hopefully we'll have some of those books available to you guys as we move forward with building up our lending library here. Ecosystem disruption. Animals, microbes, plants, water, air, and soil, they all have to interact, and they were all created to interact and work together in a certain way. When we go in and try to eliminate different aspects of it to try and make a more viable situation for a certain plant, we're then kind of tipping the balance of that whole delicate ecosystem. So again, we don't know what we're potentially causing for future generations. It might seem like a great idea right now, but we don't know, again, what we might be causing later on. One of the big things that GM manufacturers are promising is that you're going to have higher yield and better quality, but I was just talking to a guy this morning. He said the farmer that is right next to the place where he hunts, he says, he hunts there every single year, and he's looking at the corn, and he's like, this corn was just small ear, it was the saddest corn he's ever seen. And so, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that maybe over the long term, these aren't necessarily going to be the long-term answer. Because, and again, you can read a lot more research than what I have up here, and that is that they're promising higher yields and more protection, but that's not what's actually happening, okay? We eat GMO plant-based foods, and our animals that we're eating are eating GMO plant-based foods, so we have to assume that some of this genetic material we're being exposed to at some point, because again, we're eating the animals and we're eating the plants that are being fed this. So there's a lot of correlations between, and again, correlations aren't necessarily everything when it comes to studies, but if you see like the increased risk of autism, and we look at different types of cancers and different types of autoimmune diseases, we've seen those things escalating significantly here in the last 30, 40 years. And GMOs are not the only problem. But could they be contributing? I definitely think so. When we look at, and again, this is from Dr. Anderson's book, Food Plague, and these are just some of the studies that have been done, a sampling of them, and shows that GMOs and glyphosate, when they test on animals, there's hormone disruption, there's endocrine system disruption, there's birth defects, and the unfortunate thing that we're seeing is that a lot of chemical toxins from agriculture are actually being found in our bodies as people are taking random samples. I believe they said it was like 90% of mothers, and again, don't quote me on that, you have to go find the research for yourself, but 90% of expectant mothers that they took their blood from, they found Bt toxin in. and even in the babies, in the umbilical circulation going to the babies. So this isn't just confined to us as adults or even children, but even the unborn. It inhibits mitochondrial respiration, and that's what gives us the ability to produce energy. It's anti-androgenic, meaning that it causes testosterone levels to drop, which will throw off testosterone and estrogen balances. Bt toxin corn is classified as an antibiotic because it does go through and it kills things that eat it. Bt toxin, like we said, it works by creating perforations in the digestive system of the insects. When we look at glyphosate, it kills plants by depleting the trace minerals necessary for the things that would normally keep that plant working the way that it's supposed to. Because like I said, it's going to fix those trace minerals that it needs in order to survive. So it weakens the plant, and the plant dies, making it more resistant to the other pests and everything in the area. That's actually how it works. What we're finding, just like antibiotic resistance, though, there's super weeds that are growing, and there's super insects, because these things are starting to become, as you're killing off the weak ones, the stronger ones are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And so they're still going in and they're having the same problems with pests and the weeds taking over the crops. And something that I sometimes hesitate to even tell people, because when I told the staff when I did a little excerpt of this last week, is that DNA is always being absorbed by things that we get in from our environment, but as we're absorbing these things, and we think about something like Bt toxin, if it's absorbed by our intestinal bacteria, and this is one of the studies that they did, they said, why is Bt toxin so high in people's systems? Because it can't be because they're eating this much, but they think that the genes are actually being absorbed. Like we talked about, sometimes genes are absorbed or transferred between different species, bacteria and viruses, and it might be being transferred to our intestinal bacteria, and then our intestinal bacteria are actually the ones making the toxin, which, it's sobering. I can see that from all your faces. Again, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, and again, you have to read the research and determine for yourself, is this bogus or is this for real? So what is the solution? And we don't have time to really get into the solution tonight, but this is just kind of some ideas to get your minds going. Is it more scientifically engineered crops? Do we need to continue to do this? Do we need better farming methods? And that's what Dr. Anderson really pushes, and again, he has a master's degree in this agriculture, but he's also a DO, so I mean he has the healthcare side of things as well. Do we need to waste less? Because everybody's like, well, we don't have enough food, so that's why we need GM crops, so that we can make more food. But again, looking at some of the documentaries out there, is that we roughly throw away like 60 to 70% of our food, especially here in America. Other countries not so much, but we're just very wasteful. Maybe we could solve some of those problems by not being so wasteful. If more people had a backyard garden, could this help out? I definitely think so. And just changing the way that we view our food. Like I said, it's fuel. Are you going to give yourself good fuel, good building blocks, or are you going to give yourself bad fuel and bad building blocks? So we've made it through the first section, and that's a hard topic to cover, but I think it is a very important topic to cover. So next thing is gluten and other common allergens, and we want to answer the question, is gluten really that bad? What is gluten? We'll get into that, but gluten is really the Latin word for glue. So you imagine, what does glue do? Well, it's an adhesive, it sticks, it holds things together. Gluten is a family of proteins, so it is a protein in nature, and it's found in multiple grains, and you can see the list up here: wheat, barley, rye, spelt, kamut, and triticale. Those are just some of the main areas where we can find this type of gluten. Some things that we'll see in food labels that signify gluten, or potentially can signify gluten. There's a much more exhaustive list in different resources out there, but food starches, food emulsifiers, some food colorings, malt derivatives, and dextrins. You'll see maltodextrin in a lot of different things. People that have celiac disease, which is a complete autoimmune allergy to gluten, they can't eat any of these things. They have to be on the lookout for all these different areas, whereas most of us, if we have maybe a sensitivity, it doesn't necessarily become quite as important. But again, as we look at an ingredient list here, the more stuff you see, the more potential that you have that you're going to get something that's either genetically modified or that is gluten containing. It won't say gluten or wheat or anything that plain in the writing. So When we look at wheat, what it breaks down into is that we have a protein, which is the gluten portion, then we have a lectin portion. Has anybody heard the word lectin before? No, that's a new one. Okay. So what lectins are, and specifically for wheat is a wheat germ agglutinin. A lectin is a protective mechanism produced by the plants, just like we would produce things like antibodies when we're infected. A lectin is something that goes through and it kind of adheres and gives the opportunity to essentially be antibacterial or to get into the animal and to it essentially goes in and just kind of grabs onto its cells and thinks that it's going to do something to cause the animal to have disease and not eat its species again. So that's what a lectin is, and that's why in a lot of autoimmune diets, or if you look at a lot of paleo diets, they encourage you to avoid lectin-containing things. Things like potatoes, white potatoes, tomatoes, most grains, nightshade plants, because they can be inflammatory and they can cause issues in our digestive system. They're made to cause issues in the digestive systems of whatever eats them, including us. Okay? Gluten has multiple cross-reactive components. When we look at gluten, like I said, it breaks down from the protein, and there's different components. And what we look at, and you guys have all heard of celiac disease, yes? Okay. And we look at celiac disease, what they usually test for is what we call alpha-gliadin. It's a component of the gluten. But the unfortunate thing is that there's multiple other components of gluten, because there's alpha, beta, gamma, and omega gliadin. But even on top of that, then we also have the glutenin portion of the protein, gluten. And then we also have transglutaminase, which is another aspect of this whole gluten kind of complex. And then what oftentimes happens, especially in processing, is that gliadin is then deaminated, meaning that it's chemically altered so that it, essentially what they're making is they're making it more able to absorb in water, because usually these types of proteins, they will not bind very well, and so you imagine if you're trying to cook with it, it's not going to work too great. So what's happened is they've started to deaminate the gluten, so that way when you're making your breads and your cakes and everything, it gives you this awesome texture that we all love, and it rises amazingly, and it's just great. So that's what deamination does. But what they're thinking is, because this is all from hybridization, that's how we've gotten this deaminated, or a part of how we've gotten this deaminated gluten, is they're saying this is probably some of the reason why we're seeing the increased incidence of gluten reactions in people. So like we said, there's celiac disease, which is a genetic disease that actually completely goes through, and when you have gluten, it just kind of destroys all those little fingers in the digestive system we were talking about. It starts to make those things shorten down, and you don't absorb your food very well. For those of you who know somebody who has celiac, it's a very, very bad situation if you eat gluten. And you can kind of see that this came out of the British Medical Journal here, I believe it was about 10, 12 years ago, and it was talking about people that actually have celiac disease that is diagnosed, and it's a very small percentage. Only about 12.5% of people that actually have celiac disease have been diagnosed. So there's a lot of people that have undiagnosed silent celiac disease or latent celiac disease that might not come on until later in life. And so that's where we also get gluten enteropathy, meaning that it's not celiac disease, but you still get digestive system involvement. There's no genetic markers for that, though. And there's also just gluten sensitivity, which is, again, an immune response. And this is kind of what we see, again, the very small percentage of people that actually have celiac disease, another, a little bit larger percentage who will develop celiac disease or have latent, and then there's a ton more people that have non-celiac disease sensitivity. And there's different numbers out there. Some people say there's roughly 30% of the population that has some sort of gluten sensitivity. I've heard estimates up to 70 to 80 to 90%. Again, it depends on who you talk to and who you read, but it's definitely becoming more of a problem. Is it because we have better detection methods? Is it because we're more aware of a diagnosis of gluten sensitivity or celiac disease? Could it be because of the GMOs or the hybridization? Because even though GMOs aren't necessarily inherently in wheat, Are they getting cross-pollinated from some of the genetically modified foods that are being produced? Is it lifestyle factors leading to diminished health and poor immune systems? Is it leaky gut? Is it the gluten deamidation process that we've been talking about here? Who knows? It's probably a combination of all of these things. There may not be one specific answer. And some people will ask the question, they're like, well, is it really that much worse than it was now? And you know, if we think back, I mean, I think back when I was younger, and some of you can think back even a little further than that, and you think, okay, how many people that I know had celiac disease, or people that had reactions to gluten? And most of you probably have a hard time thinking back, 30, 40 years, and like, I don't remember anything like that going on. And what they did a study on this. They actually found some blood that had been well preserved. I believe it was from the 1960s. No, 1940 to 1954. And there was a good number of samples, and they compared that sampling to people today. I should say this actually came out in 2009. And what they said, during 45 years of follow-up, undiagnosed celiac disease was associated with nearly a 4-fold increase in death. That was just kind of a sidebar from that. People that had been diagnosed with celiac disease were 4 times more likely to die from other complications, not necessarily from celiac disease. The prevalence of undiagnosed celiac disease seems to have increased dramatically, though. That was another conclusion that they came to in the study, and they said specifically during the past 50 years. So again, there's been, for sure, some changes in the last 50 years, and probably even longer ago than that. Some other common allergens, we talked about gluten, kind of hammered that one a bit. There's a lot more on the subject again, and I encourage you guys, as I did with GMOs, do some research, dive in some more. There's a lot of stuff out there for you to glean through. Some other common allergens, corn, and again, may have something to do with genetic modification. Soy, again, big time. Those are 2 of our biggest genetic modifiers. And unfortunately, a lot of what our dairy is eating and our eggs are eating. So again, we're seeing a lot of potential correlation between GMO and some of the common allergens, nuts, seeds, shellfish. Very common things that we see as food allergies. So, food sensitivities, that's a good lead into this last subject we're going to talk about here. Is that, are they really for real? And yes, they are. When we look at food allergies, specifically, this is where a lot of healthcare professionals have a disconnect, because they're like, you don't have a food allergy because every time you eat gluten, you don't have this swelling reaction and anaphylaxis and a skin breakout. Those are the types of things that we expect to see in a food allergy, with an immune response causing a rapid, significant, and sometimes potentially life-threatening reaction. And it's very confined to our digestive system, our respiratory system, and our skin. Those systems that are meant as barriers to keep things out that aren't supposed to be. As opposed to food sensitivity, which is an immune response still, but it's more of a delayed response, and it causes a wide spectrum of symptoms, and we'll see some of those symptoms here as we move forward. But it's not necessarily just isolated to the digestive system or to the respiratory system or to the skin. The last option that we have, and this is something that I just actually in making this presentation kind of learned this and put this together, is that there's a difference between a food sensitivity and a food intolerance. You think about something like lactose intolerance. It's not a sensitivity, it's the fact that your body doesn't have the proper enzymatic reactions available to it to be able to break that down. The same thing could be said if you don't have enough stomach acid. And you might notice that certain things cause your stomach to really feel upset, or you might get some reflux. That's an intolerance. You might notice that certain foods, once they hit to the small intestine, our pancreas is what secretes a lot of different enzymes that help to break down our starches, our fats, and our proteins. And if those things are lacking, we're not going to digest as well, and you're going to have food intolerant types of symptoms. What it comes down to is it's all about the immune system. When we look at our immune system, like we said, a lot of it is maintained within our digestive system, because that's where we gain a lot of these exposures. So it's our first line barrier system and first response to invaders, and because of that, we have a lot of immune tissue here. And this, again, I know you can't see the illustrations here, I wish the screen's a little bit bigger, but there's a lot of lymph tissue. There's just an unthinkable amount of immune cells that are circulating very close by to the digestive system to be able to take care of any potential threat or invader. gut irritation from multiple different things. It could be from an infection. It could be from a food that you're sensitive to. It could just be that your digestive system is starting to break down because you're stressed out all the time, and what we call your secretory IgA, a part of your immune system, is not expressing itself well, and it makes you much more susceptible to developing gut irritation, which then leads to inflammation, which can then cause permeability. And permeability, that leaky gut type of syndrome, and again, we're not going to talk about leaky gut here in depth. I did that in my presentation I did last year. But this is what can lead to a host of problems. When we look at, you say, oh, this is happening all the time in my body, though, where I'm having, all these things that I'm exposed to in my digestive system. Yes. And normally what happens is we have the initial exposure to whatever it is that's irritating, and our body beats it off with our immune system, and our immune system then can say we got all these different things, the bacteria, whatever the offending organism is, out of there, and then the body can then rebuild itself. That's self-limited. It should go away after a short period of time. What happens is if you keep on hammering this system over and over and over again, you get chronic inflammation, and that's where things can become a bad situation where it doesn't heal. You can develop more of a porous gut. You can develop that leaky gut. Unfortunately, when we have this type of a situation, it doesn't just stop in our digestive system, because we can see things like congestion, nasal discharge, headaches, weight gain. We do definitely see a lot of digestive problems that can be associated with food sensitivities, and we see constipation, diarrhea, bloating, gas, burping, just overall pain in our stomach area. But you can even get neurological complications from this, like we see brain fog, depression, anxiety. It can affect our joints and make us have joint pain. It can cause fatigue, skin changes, and behavioral changes. So lots of different associations here. Dr. Perlmutter, who is a neurologist, and he actually wrote this book, Grain Brain. I'm reading through it right now. It's a really good book, and he said something really, what I thought was kind of profound. And what he said was, at the heart of nearly every disorder and disease is inflammation. Again, there's that big word, inflammation. Again, that activation of the immune system. When we introduce anything to the body that triggers an inflammatory response, we set ourselves up for taking on much greater risk for a medley of health challenges, from chronic daily nuisances like headache and brain fog to serious ailments such as depression and Alzheimer's. Each one of us is unique in terms of our genotype, our DNA, and our phenotype, which phenotype describes exactly what he says here, how genes express themselves in their environment, that epigenetic control. What's actually going to happen when your genes are activated, or are they going to be activated? Unchecked inflammation in me, and he was referring to himself, could result in obesity and heart disease, but the same condition in you could translate to an autoimmune disorder. So again, it's all that genetic susceptibility, but it all comes back to inflammation. This is just a little bit of a schematic I put together for how do we develop leaky gut and how does it affect our bodies. There's actually a much better one here on this page from Dr. Vojdani, who does a lot of research into this intestinal permeability issue and gluten sensitivity, just sensitivity in general. And what we see is that there's an immune response here because either there's some sort of bacteria or virus or something that's coming in and causing an issue within the digestive system. But then we have all these other proteins in here that could be from food that we're eating. And they can start to then come through the digestive system, activate our immune system, and they can cause different reactions here. When you see Th1, Th2 reactions, again, those are just branches of the immune system that can be activated. And in one case, they can go and cause just tissue damage because of the inflammatory chemicals that are made. But the other problem is that sometimes we'll create what we call autoantibodies, meaning that gluten looks very similar to your thyroid tissue. And gluten protein looks very similar to an enzyme called GAD, glutamic acid decarboxylase. And gluten looks very similar to our cerebellum in our brainstem. So this goes far beyond just my digestive system being a problem. why are we having more of these reactions these days? And then again, there's a myriad of different reasons why, and you'll see a lot of these are just repeated from what we talked about before. Is it because we have leaky gut and food's crossing the digestive system and the immune system is reacting with the food? That's definitely part of it, and that's been proven in the literature. Do we have deficient and incompetent immune systems, meaning that we're more susceptible to infections? I believe that is without a question accurate and true. We start to think about hygiene, and we've become very hygienic people, but to the point where we're destroying normal bacteria that should be there and making us more susceptible to bad bacteria. Not breastfeeding, being vaccinated early, a lot more interventions when we're younger, higher maternal stress and childhood stress. All these things lead to incompetent immune systems. Genetically modified foods, not like our ancestors ate. Do GMOs have a part in creating leaky gut? There are people out there that would say for sure yes. It seems like there's some good evidence behind that, yeah, there could be. SAD stands for Standard American Diet. That's really kind of what it is. It is a bit sad. And lifestyle. When we look at calorie-rich, nutrient-poor food, it does not give us the ability to regenerate, heal, and carry on life as we are supposed to. Food additives, things that were not in our food or in our bodies, 100 years ago, are now very commonplace. Stress. Again, lots and lots of stress. Not to say that we haven't had stress in centuries past, but we have different types of stress, and I'd say much more of it that we're bombarded with on a daily basis. Lack of exercise, lack of movement, again, all of these things I believe are all contributory. So, what do we do? And this is just going to be a brief overview. If you really want more information about how we can make the digestive system better, watch that digestive health video that I did last year. It's on our YouTube channel. And this is just kind of an overview of what I talked about in that. Hippocrates said disease begins in the gut, and my determination from that was then, well, if we want to get somebody truly healthy, we have to get their digestive system, we have to get their gut back online. One of the things I do to assess people is I do a metabolic assessment form, which is just a questionnaire that you go through and you fill out, and we start to target in what are some areas that might be potential issues that you're having, problems that we can help out with. The first 7 categories relate to digestive system, and there's also liver function, blood sugar regulation, hormonal regulation, thyroid function, adrenal health. It covers a lot of different symptoms from a functional approach as opposed to do you have a disease? Because a lot of people have pre-disease states, but they don't have a disease yet. And because of that, your doctor won't do anything to treat you. But can we catch some of those things early, make it so you don't have those issues? We would hope so. There's food allergy and sensitivity testing out there. Pretty much you take blood, you react it with antigens from a food, and you say, does the blood react? If it does, that means every time you're taking the food into your body, you're having a reaction to it. That's one way you can do to determine if you have some allergens. Expensive way. A cheaper way, and sometimes a better way, depending on who you ask, is doing an elimination provocation diet, meaning that you eliminate lots and lots of food. And we talked about autoimmune diets already and Paleolithic diets, and what those do is they really narrow down the focus of what you're eating. And most of the foods that people eat on those diets are non-allergen forming. They don't cause people to have allergic reactions. And then what you can do is you can slowly add things back in, one at a time, to see does my body react to it. Again, a cheaper way to determine, and sometimes your body tells you more than a blood test does. So, digestive health, what do we need to do? We need to clean out the junk. We need to make sure that you have good gut inhabitants, meaning that you have good beneficial bacteria that are crowding out the bad bacteria, so that way your digestion can be healthy. Making sure you have good stomach acid and enzymes, making sure your liver and your gallbladder are working the way they're supposed to, repairing any permeability that might be there, and we do that through decreasing inflammation and calming down your immune system. The 5R program is a program that is instituted in functional medicine circles a lot to help restore digestive health. The R stand for remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and reintroduce. Remove, like I said, we need to get rid of those bad things in our digestive system and replace it with good things. That's the replace part. Reinoculate, get good bacteria and prebiotics into the digestive system. Then we need to work on repairing. And sometimes we can do all these things at once. But then give some different nutrients that can help to get the digestive system regenerated and healing and growing again the way it's supposed to. Our digestive system, each cell It depends on who you ask. Some people will say 6 days. It's all semantics. But in every 2 to 3 weeks, you have a completely new digestive lining, which is just fantastic because it does heal up quickly. It can heal up quickly if you do the right things. So it's a pretty amazing process. And like I said, we reintroduce the foods. Can you handle them? Awesome. If you can't, you stay away from them. Okay? A complete repair and clear diet is something that you can go through and do. I've done one of these myself just because I wanted to see what it was like. It's a little intense, but it is really, really good. It's beneficial. It changes your lifestyle because you're doing something for at least 5 weeks. Some people I have them do it for 6 to 8 weeks. So there's a gut healing part of the program, and then helping the liver get back online in your detoxification system to clear out some of the junk. And you say, well, why would I do this? Well, we want to try and regain your health. And we do that, like I said, we start the digestive system, and then we start to take care of everything else. If we can get the digestive system resolved, a lot of times everything else falls into place the way it's supposed to. Not always, but it's definitely a start. Hitting the reset button. Some of us need to do that, especially after the holidays, myself included. It's not just, yeah. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of say, okay, I'm going to change the way I'm eating for this period of time. And then the idea is that you stick with it. You don't just go right back to the way you were eating before. That's going to give you optimized health now. It's going to give you optimized health for the future. So wrapping it up, what should I do? We vote in something that is not even close to an election. We vote and we say, these are the foods that we're going to purchase. These are the foods that we're not going to purchase. We do it every time we go to the grocery store. You can determine if something is organic, and specifically when you look at produce, it should say organic on it, and it should have a good accrediting agency on that, but it should also have a 5-digit code, and it should start with a 9. That's one way that you can tell. There are some 5-digit codes that starts with an 8, I believe, and those can be questionable. Let's just put it that way. Another cool thing that is becoming bigger is this non-GMO project, and you can find a lot of products, even like in Martin's, Walmart, Kroger, that have this label on them. You look for that label and you know it's been put through some pretty rigorous studies to see is it GMO, and they go back and they look at the sources of all this. So that's a good thing to be looking for. And again, you're voting. You're saying, I like things that are labeled non-GMO. So it just puts that out there to the companies and say, we want more of this or we want less of this, depending on how you vote. And avoiding allergenic foods, and Dr. Lindholm does a great job in his grocery store tour, kind of taking around the grocery store saying, these are great things to eat, these are things, yeah, it is good, and it's a videotaped, or I shouldn't say taped, it's video recorded, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. So shopping the perimeter is definitely better, and again, looking for the organic. Organic insinuates that it should be non-GMO. So that's, again, should be. We don't know about all the pollen sharing that happens, but we can always hope. That's the thing. You have to do what you can. We can't be 100% sure anymore. That's kind of the scary thing when it comes to genetic modification. But like I said, we can do what we can and try and do as much as we can. Like I said, Dr. Lindholm's grocery store tour right there. Just additionally, we have to look at stress health, immune health, exercise, and a health-promoting diet. We're eating things we've never eaten before, especially, like I said, when we look at food labels. Trying to avoid things that we don't recognize the names of is a good rule of thumb. Our food is eating things it's never eaten before, and that's another scary thing. So that's where even like free-range, grass-fed, all of that comes in very handy. When you go to a butcher that actually like you can talk to and say, hey, where did this come from? That's a much better way to be able to do that and have a good idea. If you want to know more, we do have some links on our website. We post some stuff to our Facebook sometimes. We post it to YouTube. Like I said, all these videos we tend to upload there, so you can go to our website and find the links there. Some resources for you guys. There's a number of different documentary videos. These are just a few of them. There's lots of good ones out there. Hungry for Change, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, which is one about juicing. There's one down here called Fresh. Food Matters. One specifically geared towards genetically modified foods is called Genetic Roulette. Give you, again, a lot of good information on that. Some of these you can find, like if you have Netflix, some of them you can find on YouTube. If you want to get more information, you can get more information that way. A lot of different books up here, and we have some of these as part of our lending library already. But these are just things that give you a little bit more information. This is where I've gotten a lot of my education from these sources. Dr. Karazian, Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms? When my lab tests are normal, why isn't my brain working? He wrote both of those, and he has some really good sections about autoimmunity in there, gluten, and how it affects our nervous system and our thyroid. Dr. Younger, as I told you about earlier, the book Clean Gut, and just doing different things to help support our digestive system. Dr. Perlmutter, like I said, Grain Brain, that'll be a book here. Once I finish with it, it'll be in our lending library, also the Clean Gut. Dr. Davis wrote a book called Wheat Belly. Lots of really good information in that book. Some different cookbooks. This is one I have, the Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook by Mickey Trescott. Lots of really, really great recipes for somebody who's trying to eat a healthier diet that actually tastes good. Because you're like, what do I eat? You know, I have just like salad and carrot sticks. No, there's some really good stuff out there that you can do, and she has some really good recipes. Angie Alt has the Alternative Autoimmune Cookbook. Again, I don't have that one, but I've seen it before and read through it. Some really good recipes in it. Dr. Valentine is, this is her book. It's called The Paleo Approach, and I know I'm showing you guys a lot of like paleo information. That's because these things are based on the principles of trying to reduce immune reactions, trying to reduce your exposure to allergens, eat the way that people did, they would say millions of years ago, thousands of years ago. I would say, yeah, definitely thousands of years ago. We look at some of these things. But I mean, and she just has lots of really great illustrations, and she is a PhD who was diagnosed with autoimmune disease and pretty much, I don't want to say cured herself, but she's managing it, and she found all this research. And it's put together in a really good format, so a really good reference book there. And she actually has a cookbook out now too. And then, like I said, Dr. Anderson's book, Food Plague. It's not super technical, so I think it's a good informative read. And he goes a lot more into what he believes are, here's the solutions for what we can do to help out our agricultural system. So I encourage you to check that out. Some internet resources, and if we need to go back to some of these at the end, and you can take a look through them. ResponsibleTechnology.org is about GMOs. Non-GMO Project, we talked about the non-GMO label certification. They have their own website. AutoimmunePaleo.com is Mickey Trescott's website, and she has a lot of her recipes for free on there. You don't even have to buy the book, but the book is really fantastic, so I'd recommend you get it. Learn Genetics at utah.edu. If you just Google University of Utah and genetics, it'll bring you to their genetics homepage, and they have some really cool stuff there that you can kind of read through, and they show both alternative views. They say this is, you know, good in this way, but we also have to consider these ramifications. So I think it's a good balanced source that you can take a look at. And then Mercola.com, Dr. Mercola has some information about GMOs as well. If you go to YouTube and type in GMO, you'll just be inundated with so much information, but this is where you can get some of the resources. Some of the videos I showed you at the beginning, or all the videos I showed you at the beginning, are found on YouTube here. There's actually a full documentary that's on here called Seeds of Death. So, like I said, some of this stuff is available for free out there. There's actually some smartphone apps that you can get, and Dr. Martin's actually told me about this one, the IIT, the Food Ambassador. It's free, and what you do, you download it onto your phone. If you have a smartphone, it'll actually take a picture of the barcode, and you can say, I want something that is non-GMO, free of artificial sweeteners, gluten-free and wheat-free. And it'll you take a picture of it, and a lot of the stuff is in the database. There is some stuff that isn't, but it'll say, this is not for you. It's not a non-GMO product. Or it'll say, this has gluten in it, this has, you're going to have to like read through all of the different things on the label. So that's a pretty cool thing that's available. Non-GMO Project has a similar type of an app, shopping item. There's lots of other ones out there, but those are two of the more popular ones. So, I hope I've given you a lot of resources here. I've given you a lot of information. I know that my voice is starting tire out. My brain's starting to tire out a little bit too. This is the time where you determine, okay, what am I going to do with all this information? I just spent an hour and 15 minutes of my time here gaining some information. Am I going to change anything in my lifestyle because of it? I hope I didn't waste your time. You didn't waste your time here. I hope we got you some good information that you can take some action on. And I hope I gave you some good action steps as to what you can do to make some small changes or some big changes. If you want to try and do a 5 or 6 week repair and clear program, you can talk to me, you can talk to Dr. Lindholm, talk to Dr. Martins. Those are some pretty intensive things to do, but I highly, highly encourage them. I've seen people's life and health turn around because of them. So. And the other thing is share this stuff. A lot of people, and you can tell from the number of patients that we have here, and we have a patient population that's fairly large. Here there are 2, 4, 6, 8 of you. And this information needs to be shared. It needs to at least be planted in people's minds and say, there is an alternative out there that needs to be considered. Because there was that one guy who was like, and he's like, what's a GMO? He was like, I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. I'm healthy. It might not affect you now, but could it in the future? If we don't consider our health now, we're going to have to consider it sometime in the future. That's for darn sure. So, yeah. Now you guys are all a little glazed over. So what I'll do, I know you have a question, Nancy. What I'll say here real quick before we finish up.